Welcome. Thank you. What a spectacular New Hampshire afternoon this is. You know, when I'm thinking about why we are here, why do we do this? Why do we give this medal? Why do we come out for Medal Day? And then I was thinking, you need an excuse on a spectacular day like this to come have a picnic in a place so beautiful? No, we do this just because how could you not? Let me just ask before I start, how many people this is your first Medal Day? Oh, that's fantastic. That's a lot of people. Welcome, a special welcome to you. And for all the rest of you, I don't think anything makes me happier than knowing that Medal Day has such passionate followers and people who come year after year, regardless of who the speaker, the medalist might be, just to experience, again, this magical afternoon. It's a rare and sobering thing in life to be given and to know ahead of time that you have been given a chance, one chance, to tell a perfect stranger how grateful you are for their existence on the earth. Over the past 6 Medal Days, there have been a couple that stood out as opportunities of that kind for me. And in those years, the speeches I made were so much more difficult to write. I started them, gave up, started them over again, and in the end, felt I had not even begun to get at the depth of my gratitude. That's why it was so very kind of our 2017 MacDowell Medalist, David Lynch, to decline our invitation to appear in person today. Now, of course, Mr. Lynch explained with due regret that he was obliged to decline because of a long-planned family vacation. But really, he was just doing me a favor. Lynch's first feature film, Eraserhead, blew my 17-year-old mind the first time I saw it at a midnight showing at the Pittsburgh Playhouse. Woo! In early 1981. Blew it in ways that I have yet to recover from. Twin Peaks forever rewired the circuitry of the apparatus I use to scan and interpret American life. And I'm just going to totally nerd out on you people now and confess that I have seen Lynch's 1983 adaptation of one of my favorite novels, Frank Herbert's Dune, at least 5 times. And I have never failed to totally dig it. If the man were going to be sitting right to my left today, I would have faced a solid week of writing and rewriting, pondering and repondering, deleting and giving up and starting over, hoping to take advantage of my one shot and do justice to all the things in his work that I'm grateful for. Instead, I just tossed this puppy off in a night or two. What a relief. I can say whatever I want. I could talk about how much I like his recordings of zither music, or his series of documentaries about the history of needlepoint. Just go away, Siri. The guy'd never know. To see what is in front of one's nose, George Orwell famously said, needs a constant struggle. Think about that. To see what is in front of one's nose needs a constant struggle. The human mind, that ancient, dubious assemblage of learned and inherent biases, habits of sensory triage, and cognitive rules of thumb, has been so traumatized by the unremitting, grim truths of evolutionary and human history, perhaps, or so contrived by the mocking hand of a cruel prankster of a god, as to become resistant to truth. It's because of this doubtful gift of being able to wish away and ignore the cold, hard, cheerless facts of existence that, as individuals and as nations, we are continually surprised by calamities, defeats, and disasters that in hindsight ought to have were obvious all along. When the ice caps melt and the lowlands flood and species collapse and earth turns inhospitable, those who survive will look back and say, how could they have missed this? How could they not have known? Wasn't it obvious? And the answer, of course, will be, it needs a constant struggle to see what is in front of one's nose. A constant struggle. Who has the strength or the time for that? Those among us who are equal to that struggle, we call prophets. And in general, we treat such people very shabbily. And that's just when it comes to what's right in front of your nose. The plain truths, the indisputable data, the behaviors that speak for themselves. If even seeing those things requires constant struggle, what about the ambiguities? Let's say you step up as a concerned citizen and devotee of truth and lover of humankind to undertake the constant struggle of seeing what is right in front of your nose. What about the hidden truths, the buried drives and desires, the things that lie beyond distant doorways, behind the curtains of dreams, deep in the sea bottoms of memory? Who's going to see all that while you're busy looking just past the Orwellian tip of your nose? Over the past half century, no one has taken a harder, clearer look behind those doors, beyond those curtains, and into those deep oceans than David Lynch. My childhood, Lynch has famously said, was elegant homes, tree-lined streets, the milkman, building backyard forts, droning airplanes, blue skies, picket fences, green grass, cherry trees. Middle America as it's supposed to be. But on the cherry tree, there's this pitch oozing out, some black, some yellow, and millions of red ants crawling all over it. I discovered that if one looks a little closer at this beautiful world, there are always red ants underneath. To see the ooze and the swarm, the weird in the everyday, the horror just beneath the ordinary surface of things, the freak show in the supermarket, and even more powerfully, to find dark beauty in that freakiness and horror. I want to extend Orwell's dictum and say that this too needs a constant struggle. And yet, that isn't really true. Moments when we manage to see what is in front of our noses, say the degree to which our strongest beliefs are based on wishes and fears, or the racism and misogyny that undergird our most powerful institutions, those moments are rare and hard won. Some of us never manage those moments at all. But each of us, even those who might walk past that cherry tree 100 times and never see the raging boil of ants, even those of us who try to maintain a healthy distance between ourselves and the freaks and the horrors, every single one of us slips into the weird easily, helplessly, with astonishing freedom every single night of our lives, with no struggle at all. In dreams, as Roy Orbison sings so memorably on the soundtrack of Blue Velvet, in our nightly dreams, our weird, dark, beautiful, freaky, and horrifying dreams, we are all David Lynches. Our gazes unflinching and patient and curious, dispassionate, uncensoring, reporting without judgment or reservation on the blue velvet violence of our thoughts and the deeply strange organ that thinks them. In dreams, once we've been visited, as Orbison horrifyingly and Lynch-esquely put it, by that candy-colored clown they call the Sandman, we all gaze without flinching through the sea depths of our darkest fears and wishes, behind the curtains and doorways of the daytime rationalizations and evasions and taboos. That part's easy. The struggle comes when someone tries to wrestle those truths, the night truths, into the light. I'm not talking about tricks like the use of forced perspective, Dutch angles, over-reliance on dwarfs and shadow puppets and talking animals and all the other conventions that artists, including David Lynch, have employed over the years in an ultimately doomed attempt to capture the dreaminess of dreams. To be honest, I kind of hate that stuff. I'm the kind of guy who fast forwards through dream sequences in movies and in books skips to the end of dream paragraphs. All that is easy enough too. The truth of a dream is not its dreamlike quality. The truth of a dream is a tree bleeding ants through a gaping wound. It is, in other words, the truth right in front of our noses, which often enough we can't see, not because of our vanity or self-delusion or fear, but for the simple reason that we go through life with our eyes closed. We call the people who remind us to open our eyes artists. And in general, we don't treat them a whole lot better than we do our prophets. But at MacDowell, we like to feed them. And shelter them. And make sure their chairs are comfy. And their light is adequate. And their beds are soft enough for dreaming. Every year, we give one of them a medal. And this year, that medal is going to an artist who has been opening our eyes and aiming our gazes to the night truths of the world for the past 40 years. Since he could not be with us here today, I'd like to invoke the spirit and power of his work now by asking you to turn to your neighbor, the person in the seat beside you or behind you or in front of you, okay? And imagine that in place of a head, he or she has an enormous horseshoe crab. Come on. Now reach out and gently take hold of their right tentacle with your own. Okay? Are we doing this? And say, I have complicated feelings about wildebeests. Come on. Thank you. In the name of David Lynch, the 2017 MacDowell Medalist, I wish you the truth of your dreams, violent and dark and beautiful as that truth may be, and the strength and the courage to face it. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. I'd like to introduce longtime member of the MacDowell Board of Directors, but brand new president of the MacDowell Board of Directors, my friend, my colleague, and my fellow adventurer into many night truths, I'm sure, in years to come, Andy Senchak.
You're good. So when the board asked me to
become president of the board, I thought, oh, gee, that would be pretty nice, except for one thing. And I don't even need to tell you what it is. Michael, you are a national treasure. Thank you. So it is a great honor for me to be among those welcoming you to Medal Day. After the ceremony is concluded and the picnic lunch is eaten, our ancient custom is to invite you to visit the Fellows Studios. In the studios hang tombstones. If you visit each of the 32 studios and read each name on each tombstone, you will read 7,943 names. However, if you were to enter just one studio, pause for a single moment, and read one name, you will experience the truth of MacDowell, that it is a place and an idea. The place and the idea for us are as live and growing as the field we sit in and the forest surrounding us. The place, in part, originally an 80-acre farm and a farmhouse named Hillcrest by Edward and Marion MacDowell. The idea, sanctuary from Boston and New York, where Edward would have the freedom and the solitude for his work as a composer. David Macy, our resident director, and the last speaker before we present the medal, lives at Hillcrest. No tombstones hang on its walls. However, David does invite you to Hillcrest's music room, where we have a volunteer who'll be playing music that was composed on these grounds. Well, the place and the idea developed. 2 years after the MacDowells moved into Hillcrest, Marion built a cabin in the woods where Edward worked, and Marion delivered the now iconic baskets to his door. And they dreamed of sharing their retreat with artists from all disciplines. At this time, Edward also became the first professor of music in the newly created Division of Fine Arts at Columbia. The division included literature, music, and architecture, all strong interests of MacDowell. Seth Lowe, the president of Columbia, shared MacDowell's vision of the unity of the fine arts. Nicholas Murray Butler, his successor, did not. By 1904, MacDowell and the chairs of the fine arts departments had all resigned. Edwin MacDowell himself died in 1905. Marion MacDowell committed herself to realizing their dream. The first studio, Schelling, was built in 1907. The first residents were Helen Farnsworth Means, a sculptor, and her sister, Mary, a writer. Since then, 7,941 names have been added to the tombstones. Butler remained president of Columbia for more than 3 decades. In 1941, as an ex officio member of the Pulitzer Prize Board, he pressured the board to reject the fiction jury's selection that year of Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls. As a brief aside, Allen Ginsberg, shortly after that, wrote on his dorm room window, "Butler has no balls," and that did get him expelled. Alliteration. When it became clear to me that Michael and Cheryl would not permit me to invite a fellow to speak in my place, I began reading the essays in MacDowell's centennial book, A Place for the Arts. I recommend them to you, all of them. A phrase in the essay by Vartan Grigorian explains to me why, for the last 121 years, people have dedicated themselves to this place and to this idea. Here's Vartan's quote. "It is the artists who weave the past together with the future. They help us become good ancestors, people who bequeath to those who follow after us." There are 62 good ancestors on the board of the MacDowell Colony. Could all of you stand up right now, all those people who are on the board right now, all you good ancestors, including you, Bob Larson, Barbara, and all the artists. These good ancestors make this place a better place. If you look out to the tent, over there you'll see Savage Library. There's a remarkable addition to it that was built last year. You can visit it later. It was designed by Todd Williams and Billy Tien. They are not here today. They are designing President Obama's library. In Manhattan, where the colony was originally incorporated and where Marion embarked on her determined fundraising effort, we are moving our offices from East 81st Street to West 23rd Street. There, Cheryl, Amy, and the rest of the staff will no longer need to rest the files in the restroom. And they'll be able to offer you a place to sit when you visit and overlook the High Line. No tombstones are planned, but a few select trees around you will have donated their bark to cover one of the walls in our entrance hall. It was Tom Putnam of Peterborough. Tom, where are you? Here. You got us into this, thank you, along with Eleanor. Eleanor, where are you? Thank you, Eleanor. The two lead gifts that gave the board the courage to pursue this new headquarters. We've raised $3.5 million of the $6 million cost, and with your help and the board's determination, we'll finish that task this year. I must also, Fred Clark, the architect from Cesar Pelli and Clark, is not here today, but Fred was instrumental in designing this new space. He's done a wonderful job, and I think we're going to be in good standing with our new neighbor, the Whitney Museum. So the board not only shapes MacDowell the place, but also the MacDowell the idea of artistic freedom. Such freedom extends beyond the studios to the way in which the colony administers its business. Panels of artists in 7 disciplines award 300 residencies for more than 3,000 applications every year. No board member, other than the artists serving as panel chairs, plays a role in any selection. Today's medal is awarded in the same way. Respected participants in the chosen area are convened by a panel chair, and the selection is made by the panel. I can assure you that Hemingway, had Butler tried to pressure our board, would have received the Pulitzer. What does it take to get 7,943 names on the tombstones? My answer is that it is something common to everyone in this tent. It's the desire to be our better selves. The phrase is from Wordsworth's Prelude. When from our better selves we have too long been parted by the hurrying world and droop, sick of its business, of its pleasures tired, how gracious, how benign is solitude. For the fellow, the artist, solitude is what it's all about. How about for the rest of us? This is how I see it. When I undertake the business of MacDowell, I leave the hurrying world and enter a world where I have no idea what my efforts will lead to. What poem, play, or composition or script will be written here. MacDowell, neither the place nor the idea, does not produce an object that can be bought or sold in the market. What we produce is creative freedom, and this separates us from the society of commodities, the hurrying world. This separation gives us the space to restore our better selves. MacDowell is blessed with great ancestors. I invite all of you to become one through your participation and support. You will realize your better self. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I am Cheryl Young. I'm the executive director of MacDowell. I am one of the luckiest people on earth. I'm just as lucky as the artists in the studios. I am so happy to be under the covers with all of you. I had to say, for those of you who have been here before, you know that I usually put my foot in my mouth. So there you go. It's done. Today is a day for hope. Today is a joyful day, no matter what the news is about. And I'm really glad to see all of you. A big welcome to our presentation speaker, Christine McKenna. Christine is one of us, a woman of ideas and a writer with a keen empathy for artists who burn brightly and risk everything for the sake of their work. We're very excited to be celebrating film, so I thought I would take a few moments to talk about film at MacDowell because we don't get a chance to do that very often. This rotation is only once every 8 years, and David Lynch is the perfect recipient. MacDowell did not include film in its original mission because at the turn of the century, film was just getting started. That was around the 1890s, and it's still a very young art form. There's probably some of you in this audience who were just born or were already born when 80 years ago, the Museum of Modern Art in New York became the first major cultural institution to create a curatorial department devoted to film, putting it firmly in the realm of fine arts, just 80 years old. In the early years of MacDowell, film was interwoven with the other disciplines, and it was a little hard to uncover some of those early people who were associated with film. But let me tell you that in 1933, MacDowell's own Thornton Wilder, who was the first recipient of this medal, he was writing his first screenplay of the novella, The Bridge of San Luis Rey, which he wrote here at MacDowell. He worked in Hollywood for another 10 years, and his last screenplay was Shadow of a Doubt, which he worked at with Hitchcock at Hitchcock's request. Interestingly, Wilder also worked on It's a Wonderful Life, uncredited. You can see the echoes of our town evident in the theme of simple people grappling with the meaning of life and death. And I dare say you see the echoes of Wilder's small town life and the thrill of Hitchcock in David Lynch's work. Another favorite son of the MacDowell colony is Aaron Copland, the composer. Copland wrote the music for the film Of Mice and Men, released in 1939, and his distinct style influenced the soundtracks for many American westerns in the 1940s and 50s. In 1956, screenwriter Stuart Stern worked at MacDowell in the year he also delivered the script for Rebel Without a Cause, starring James Dean. Then, in around 1957, Alec Waugh, the elder brother of Evelyn Waugh, was working at MacDowell on the story of Island in the Sun, which starred Harry Belafonte and was controversial for its depiction of interracial romance, and also one of the few mainstream films to feature a black male leader. Joy Adamson, who wrote Born Free, was in residence in 1964, working on one of her books about African lions that would be translated to the screen and create a generation of wildlife conservationists. The key year, though, for film was around 1969 when Elodie Osborne joined the board of directors, and she did so on the condition that MacDowell would add officially the discipline of film, which we did in 1971. Elodie was on the board of the Flaherty Film Seminar, and some of you might know that that was named after Flaherty, who did the first long feature, Nanook of the North. It's still a great program. But when she joined the MacDowell board, it was for the express purpose of advancing film here. So since then, also Elodie was the first female president of the colony in 1975, which is a great landmark. And so the first fellowship in film was named in her honor. And she'd be very glad to know that we welcome about 29 filmmakers each year who go on to win Sundance Prizes, Oscars, and other wonderful festival prizes. And we're thrilled to have filmmakers with us in residence today. We passed, as Andy said, a very important landmark this year we awarded 301 residencies. That's a 30% increase, and it's really with the help of all of you that we were able to do that. Some statistics which you might be interested in. Roughly 1 out of 10 receive residencies, and we reviewed 2,137 applications last year. 70% of the people in residence are first-time fellows, and the remainder are returning artists. We received applications from 47 states and the District of Columbia in 58 countries. About 31 artists are international, or about 10%, and 58% are female. The average age of a resident artist is 43.6, with an average stay of 29 days. Every day, something new is published, presented, or performed by a MacDowell Fellow. And these are among the country's finest and the globe's finest artists. So I'd like to ask all the MacDowell Fellows, those in residence and those who came today, to please stand so we can applaud to you. Good job. 2 years ago, we announced our Art of Journalism initiative with the goal of doubling residencies for journalists. Who knew then that they would be needed so much now? Already we have welcomed, yes, I know, thank you. Already we have welcomed 38 journalists to MacDowell in this last 2 years, so we're nearly there at achieving our goal. And their work has radiated out from the colony, reaching millions of readers and sparking some new ideas about how to make the world a better place. So we still have the challenge grant going on, so that now is a great time to help us with that initiative, to give these journalists a chance. I'm also very, very proud of the fact that MacDowell is leading the way in the arts nationally by another milestone. We have reached our goal of inclusion, with 33% of artists at MacDowell coming from communities of color, more closely reflecting the general population. What we have always known is that it's not just talent, but opportunity that is critical to participation and success. That's true in any field, but especially in a field like art that has slim hope of providing a living. It requires the support of all of us, not just the family of the artist or the university they go to. It really does take everyone. What we have achieved here with this goal is to take a look at what equality can really mean in the culture that we produce, in the voices that we raise up, and in the voices that tell us something that is new. And you came here today with your minds open and ready to engage in new ideas, even if they're wild and twisted, like David Lynch's. But they put a lens on the things that we need to see, and they're just being worked out. And so it's wonderful that all of you are open to them. So I want to say thank you for that, for being part of that, and to use the words that were used by David Baum the other night to welcome all of us. Thank you for standing by our artists. This is a really important time to give them some encouragement. And I promise if you smile today, someone will smile back at you, and you'll leave today in much, I would like to say, more intelligent, but also happier and more hopeful, because the new work that comes out is going to change how we think. Now I'd like to introduce David Macy, our resident director. I've been so lucky to work with him. He is the person who makes every day a wonder here. And the staff, oh my gosh, the incredible staff, all of them work so hard to shine up this place day in and day out in both New York and New Hampshire. And I just want to give them a round of applause also.
Well, thank you so much, Cheryl. Thank you, everybody. You know, looking around on a day like this with a tent full of people who are rousingly here to celebrate the arts. I think about the only thing that could make me happier would be like a 9-month sabbatical from reading the newspaper. But today, while you're walking through the colony, I hope you'll sense the pride that's expressed in the meticulously tended gardens, the library shelves, the gleaming kitchen, the polished woodwork, the rebuilt stone steps. Like the rest of MacDowell, Medal Day is handmade. It's handmade by a team of smart and talented individuals who work together and to make this day come together into focus. And to two of those people, among many on the team, I want to pay special thanks, and that is to Dean Klingler, who works with us in our New York office, and Ann Hayashi, who I work with every day here in the Peterborough office. We also have an extraordinary group of Medal Day volunteers who are among you today, handing out programs and helping in the library, and some who actually work with us year-round as interns in the communications department and also in the library. So it takes many hands to keep this place looking the way it does. So last summer, that solar array to my left made its Medal Day debut, and I'm happy to report that 1 year later, those solar panels have soaked up 155,000 kilowatt hours of electricity. That's more than 2/3 of what the colony uses in a year. It's kept 120,000 tons of CO2 out of the air. And some of the studios that you'll visit today, 2 of them are most recently renovated buildings, Eastman and Delta Omicron. And those 2 studios are super insulated and kept comfortable with electric heat pumps, and thus serve as a template for the renovations of the balance of the buildings. So you can see that we have a great deal of work yet to do. So if you are passionate about the arts and about the environment, designated green contributions count twice. So last Tuesday night, MacDowell sponsored a free screening of a fantastic biopic on David Lynch. It's called The Art Life. It was at the Peterborough Community Theater, and Lynch's nasal twang held the film together in voiceover as he recounted a wholesome American boyhood and some bizarre traumas that haunted him beginning in adolescence. In the film, he described 3 critical junctures where he doubled down in the pursuit of making art. He ignored cautionary advice from teachers, from family, from bill collectors. And as he described it, the art life is a mythic place that's available. It's accessible in the here and now. And hundreds of artists have also described a MacDowell Fellowship as a critical juncture, a personal moment of truth when you have to decide between venturing further or turning back. The novelist Neil Mukherjee wrote 1/4 of his recent book, A State of Freedom, during his fellowship at MacDowell last year. Before departing, he wrote this: "Without the gifts of time and silence that MacDowell gave me, I would not have been able to finish this book. And in counterpoint to that gift of solitude were 2 equally valuable but more social gifts. One, the beauty of the food given us day after day, meal after meal, without a single dud, by the artists, for such they are, working in the kitchen. And 2, the friendships with some of the other artists in residence, which were initiated during my stay. And as an organization, we strive to refine those essential components of support with a constant being an unshakable respect for the art life. Respect is the operative word. It's visible in our admissions process, the staff culture, and in the design of the very buildings on the property. And since 2001, it's been my great pleasure to curate a program called MacDowell Downtown. Through that program, I've introduced over 150 artists to the regional audience. And It runs on the first Friday of the month, March through November. And if you are in town and within striking distance on September 1st, I hope you'll come to see playwright Ella Hickson when she takes the stage at the Monadnock Community Center, Monadnock Center for History and Culture. And through another channel, MacDowell in the Schools has introduced 14 artists to more than 400 students in the last year, mostly at Conval Regional High School. But it isn't just these two formalized programs that bring MacDowell into this region. We also have been involved, have had our artists involved with the Monadnock Writers Group, Leadership New Hampshire, Amherst College, Andy's Summer Playhouse, Rivermead Retirement Community, the Monadnock Music Festival, the Capitol Center for the Arts, and the New Hampshire Institute of Art. And by this time next summer, in downtown Peterborough, you'll find a riverfront park designed by MacDowell Fellow and architect Sylvia Benedito. She was the winner of a design competition organized among MacDowell Fellows, and it will take what could have been a very pedestrian space in the middle of the very center of the town's commercial district and make it into something very special. So to close, I guess I just want to say a giant thank you again to all of the artists. It is you who make this day possible. It's you who put this place on the map, and it's you who give us the gifts through your work here at MacDowell. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, David. So, I lived in Southern California in the mid to late 80s and then again in the mid 90s. During those years, I subscribed to the Los Angeles Times, which at that time was blessed with the presence of an exceptional number of really fine writers, columnists and critics whose work you looked forward to, sitting down over breakfast with the day's paper. They had strong voices and strong opinions clearly expressed, and with the best of them, you felt that each new restaurant or novel or album or artistic scene as it came along afforded them the opportunity not just to lay down judgment and flaunt their stylistic chops, but to test their own assumptions, to try the limits of their critical faculties, and most of all, to assert the primal importance of pleasure in the venture of being a critic. Our special guest today, Christine McKenna, was one of those magical LA Times writers. Her beat back then was music writing, and through her restlessness and her enthusiasm and her sharp way with a sentence, I made so many discoveries that brought me so much lasting pleasure. Christine is the author of a forthcoming biography of David Lynch, Room to Dream, which is due in February from Random House. And I'm very delighted and grateful to have the opportunity to welcome her to MacDowell today. Christine.
There's no way I could speak as eloquently about David's work as Michael. Michael, you really hit it out of the ballpark. So I'm going to talk about David, the person. My story with David began in 1980. I saw Eraserhead and was blown away, like how could someone not be? And I tracked him down and he agreed to be interviewed. So we met at a coffee shop on Sunset Boulevard called Ben Frank's. And during that period in David's life, he spent a portion of every day in a coffee shop, basically looking at people. He's a very good observer. And that day he had a slice of lemon meringue pie and coffee, of course. And he seemed very shy and humble and quiet and unusual. So we stayed in touch, and I wrote something about him, and he seemed to like what I wrote. So after that, when people would contact him about wanting to do an article on him, he often suggested me as a writer. And when we met, he was working on The Elephant Man, and his next film, Dune, shot in Mexico. After that, all his films were shot in the U.S., and he always invited me to his sets. And I spent a week in Wilmington, North Carolina on the Blue Velvet set, and I really got to watch him work. And I have no idea why he was so nice to me, but he really was. Since we met, David's stature as an artist has grown steadily, and now there's a lot written about him. Really, I think there's hundreds of books and articles. And he's often complained about how much wrong information there is about him out there. So about 2.5 years ago, I said, David, why don't we write a book about your life that gets everything right? And he thought that was a good idea. And we wanted to have all the facts and figures of his life in there correctly, but I also felt it was important that his voice be a prominent part of the book. So we came up with an unusual structure. I would do a conventional chapter based on research and interviews, and David would read it, and then he would write a chapter in response to it. So he was kind of writing, he was responding to the way people saw him and what his experience of that personal part of his life was. So I did more than 100 interviews for the book. And in doing all that deep research on David, a really surprising thing happened. The closer I got, the better he looked. I think a big part of his brilliance is rooted in how loving he is and how much love he generates in the people around him. I can't count the people that said to me, I owe my career to David. He's just been really generous, and just as he's been generous to me, he gives people chances. And, you know, there was one guy who was his driver on Twin Peaks, and 5 years later, the guy's got his own production company. David's really generous. So I'm going to close by reading 2 short excerpts from David's chapters in the book. The first one I chose because I think it gives a little bit of insight into one of the foundations of his work. And I should say, there's no way I can read these stories as well as he could tell them. He's a really good storyteller and very funny, but I'll do my best. That 50s small town thing, it's different, and to catch that mood is important. It's dreamy, that's what it is. The 50s mood isn't completely positive, though, and I always knew there was stuff going on. When I was out after dark and going around on my bike, some houses had lights on inside that were kind of warm, or I knew the people who lived in the house. Other houses, the lights were dim, and with some houses, they were almost out. There were lights on, but the house was dark, and I didn't know the people who lived there. And I get a feeling from these houses of stuff going on that wasn't happy. I didn't ever dwell on it, but I knew there were things going on behind those doors and windows. I was out one night with my brother, and we were down at the end of the street. Everything's lit up now, but in the 50s, in small towns like Boise, there were street lights, but they were dimmer, and it was much darker. It makes night much more magical because things just go into black. So we were down at the end of the street, and out of the darkness came this nude woman with white skin. Maybe it was something about the light and the way she came out of the darkness, but it seemed like her skin was the color of milk. And she had a bloodied mouth. She couldn't walk very well, and she was in bad shape, and she was completely naked. I'd never seen that before, and she was coming towards us, but not really seeing us. My brother started to cry, and she sat down on the curb. I wanted to help her, but I was young and didn't know what to do. I might have asked, "Are you okay? What's wrong?" But she didn't say anything. She was scared and beat up, but even though she was traumatized, she was beautiful. Now, anybody who's seen Blue Velvet knows that that happens in there. The second excerpt is from a chapter called Next Door to Dark. It covers the years between 1993 and 97, which is when he was making Lost Highway. I picked this because it gives a little glimpse of how David feels about show business, which is not great. And it's also a good example of how David talks about people. You know, he has this image as kind of like a kooky dreamer off in dreamland, but he's actually a very astute observer of people, and he doesn't miss much. But the way he experiences people is always with compassion and affection and absolutely no judgment. And that's one of the things I love about him. So, okay, around the time I was trying to get Lost Highway made, I was also trying to get this thing called Dream of the Bovine going. Dream of the Bovine is an absurd comedy, and although the script needs a lot of work, there are things in it I really like. Harry Dean Stanton and I went up to talk to Marlon Brando about the two of them doing it together, but Brando hated it. He looked me in the eye and said, "It's pretentious bullshit," and started telling us about these cookies made out of grass that grows in salt water that he wanted to promote. Then he told us about a car he wanted to build that had this bladder underneath that would cook this grass and make fuel, like the car would digest the grass. You could never tell if Marlon was putting you on or he was serious. The thing about Marlon was he just didn't give a shit about anything. Every business has bad behavior going on, but there's something about this business with all the egos and lies and backstabbings that makes you want to do something else rather than be in it. For sure, if anybody had that feeling, it was Brando. He played the game for a while, then he couldn't do it anymore because it just made him sick. And he'd reached a point where he just wanted to have fun. I think he was having fun, too. This was around the time he went on the Larry King show and kissed Larry King. He came up to the house a couple times. One time he came up by himself. I guess he'd driven himself, and he came in big, just big, being Brando in this house. It made me a little nervous because I didn't know why he was there or what we were supposed to do. I figured I'd make him a coffee, but right after he got here, he said, "So, you got anything to eat?" I thought, oh my God. But I said, "Marlon, I don't know. Let's go look." There was one tomato and one banana in the kitchen, and he said, "Okay, that'll do." So I got him a plate and a knife and a fork, and we sat down and started talking. Then he says, "You got any salt?" So he was salting the tomato and cutting it up and eating it while we were talking. Then Mary Sweeney, that was David's wife at the time, came in, and Brando says, "Mary, give me your hand. I want to give you a gift." So she put her hand out. He'd made a ring out of the Del Monte sticker that had been on the tomato, and he slipped it onto her finger. Marlon was dressing in drag now and then during that period. And the thing he really wanted to do was dress up as a woman and have Harry Dean dress up as a woman, and the two of them would have tea together and ad-lib while they were drinking tea. Think about that. It would have been incredible. All I'd have to do is turn the camera on, but Marlon chickened out. It drove me nuts. He should have done it. I showed Lost Highway to Brando after I finished it, but before it was released. We rented this theater and told the owner Brando was going to come by to see this film, and the theater owner was pretty pumped. So we get this thing set up, and Brando comes into the theater by himself, and they have all these treats out for him. He's got a burger with him, but he fills his pockets with candy anyway, and goes into the theater eating candy with his burger. He called me later and said, "It's a damn good film, but it won't make a nickel." It was good. He liked it. A lot of people thought Lost Highway wasn't a commercial choice, and I guess that's true. Siskel and Ebert gave it 2 thumbs down, so I got the guy at October Films to run a big ad that had an image of 2 thumbs down and text that read, "2 more great reasons to see Lost Highway." So I'm glad you're giving this medal to David because he deserves it. He's a great artist.
Please, last year I got back to our house in Maine. We drove straight up to Maine after medal day, and I took off my jacket, and I'm like, what's this? And I had the medal. I had Toni Morrison's medal in my pocket. I don't know how that happened. Okay, thank you. Well, thank you. I talked at the beginning about why do we come here? Why do we do this every year? And I do think there's something, I'll just tell you, if you don't already know it, there's something magical, profound, solemn, and beautiful about the fact that one day a year, these studios are open. It's like, it makes me think of some kind of post-apocalyptic movie where, civilization has collapsed and once a year people come in their wagons drawn by giant mutant dogs and then this, thing is like open and unveiled, and it's like a Hulk Hogan wristwatch or something like that. They wind it and it runs, and there's this like solemnity about this thing that we do just once a year, and this thing that you never get to see, that no one is allowed in. It's like Willy Wonka's factory. But you all have golden tickets for today. So please, I encourage you, I exhort you to stay, have a delicious picnic, and then go see the studios. There's incredible things happening here right now. So enjoy, have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll see you next year. Thank you. Oh my God, I forgot. When I said our medalist wasn't here, I kind of lied, because he is here. He made us a little film. How could I have forgotten? I'm sorry. Don't go anywhere.
Rolling and action.
Sorry. Got some technical problems here. There's some construction going on in this neighborhood.
Still rolling.
Thank you. Much to the MacDowell colony for this beautiful Edward MacDowell Medal. It is a real blessing to be on your list of great artists you have honored through the years.
Still rolling.
Special thanks to Kenneth Turan, David Anson, Laura Kim, Josh Siegel, Michael Chabin, and a big thank you to Christine McKenna, who is there with you now as my representative. Are you kidding me? Is that thing coming in here?
That was fantastic. Wonderful. We got to do that again. Maybe we can show that again sometime. It's going up on the website. Woohoo! Awesome. All right, thank you. See you next year. Enjoy lunch. Visit the studios. Goodbye.